In the dusty corner of Arizona's forgotten lands stands a weathered house where Joseph Running Deer has lived alone for 7 years. Once a proud Apache, now just a hollow shell of a man since the day his daughter, Maya, was found dead. The local folks whisper about his strange behavior, how he wanders his property at night with only a lantern and his grief. They say loss can drive a man mad. They don't know how right they are. When the floor of his root cellar collapses during a summer storm, Joseph discovers an ancient network of tunnels stretching beneath his property. Strange markings cover the walls, artifacts lie untouched for centuries, but what calls to him from the darkness? What truth awaits about Maya's death? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun crept through dusty windows, casting long shadows across Josue's Running Deer's weathered face. He sat motionless at his kitchen table, staring at a framed photograph, the only object in the house, free of dust. 7 years of grief had etched deep lines into his once proud features, turning his hair prematurely gray. On the mantelpiece sat a small wooden medicine box, intricately carved with traditional Apache symbols. Inside lay a single lock of black hair tied with a red ribbon. Joseph hadn't opened it since the funeral, but its presence dominated the room like a shrine. Outside, his once thriving garden had surrendered to weeds. The workshop where he'd crafted fine furniture now stood abandoned, tools rusting on the walls. Neighbors no longer came by. The last one who tried, Miss Callahan with her peach cobbler and pitying eyes, had been met with such profound silence she never returned. Joseph moved through his days like a ghost. Rise with the sun, coffee, stare at the photo. Walk the perimeter of his land, return home. Whittle wood that never became anything. Sleep when the dreams allowed it. The dreams were always the same. Maya laughing, running toward him through tall grass, her small hands reaching up, then darkness swallowing her as he stood paralyzed, unable to move, to speak, to save her. When Sheriff Blackwood found Maya's body at the bottom of Willow Creek, Joseph had screamed until his voice broke. After the funeral, he simply stopped speaking altogether. What was there left to say? Elena couldn't bear the silence. 6 months after they buried their daughter, she'd packed a single suitcase. "I can't live with a ghost while mourning one," she'd said. Joseph hadn't tried to stop her. Now, as he sipped cold coffee, his eyes drifted to the cellar door. 3 days had passed since the storm, since the floor had given way, revealing the tunnels beneath. 3 days of standing at that dark opening, lantern in hand, turning back at the last moment. The medicine box seemed to watch him accusingly. A true Apache warrior wouldn't hesitate to face whatever waited in the darkness. Joseph placed his cup in the sink alongside unwashed dishes from days before. His fingers traced the edge of Maya's photo, her 7th birthday, her life. In the image, she wore the turquoise necklace his grandmother had given him as a child. The necklace that wasn't on her body when they found her. Outside, a raven landed on the porch railing, its black eyes following him through the window. According to his grandmother, ravens guided souls between worlds. Joseph had never put much stock in the old ways, until now. The bird cawed once twice, then flew directly toward the back of the house, where the cellar doors rose from the ground like an ancient burial mound. Joseph's hands trembled as he lifted the medicine box from the mantel. If he was going into those tunnels, he would take her with him. This small piece of her spirit, perhaps that's what had been missing all these years. The courage to bring her memory into the darkness, rather than letting it haunt him from a distance. The box felt unusually heavy in his hands. When had he last held it? He ran his thumb over the carved thunderbird on its lid, protector against evil. His grandmother had told him. The small brass latch had tarnished green with time. On impulse, Joseph opened it. Inside was the lock of Maya's hair, but beneath it lay something he didn't recognize. A small folded piece of paper that hadn't been there before. His heart hammered against his ribs as he carefully unfolded it with calloused fingers. A child's drawing, crude crayon lines forming what looked like tunnels, passages branching off like roots. At the bottom, in Maya's unmistakable handwriting, "They're waiting under the house, Daddy." Joseph stared at the paper, his vision blurring. He couldn't remember Maya drawing this, couldn't remember placing it in the box. The raven called again, more insistent now. Joseph slipped the drawing into his shirt pocket, close to his heart. He gathered supplies mechanically: lantern, matches, water, rope. The tools of exploration feeling foreign in his carpenter's hands. As the sun reached its zenith, Joseph, Running Deer, stood before the cellar door, no longer a hollow man, but one filled with terrible purpose. Whatever waited in those ancient tunnels, truth, madness, or something beyond understanding, he would face it, for Maya, for himself. With one deep breath, he descended into the darkness, the medicine box tucked securely in his pocket, guiding him toward whatever truth lay buried beneath his home. The beam of Joseph's lantern cut through darkness that felt older than time itself. The air hung heavy with the scent of earth, and something else, something ancient and undisturbed. His boots made soft impressions in soil that hadn't felt a human footstep in generations. The tunnel widened after about 20 yards, the roughly hewn walls giving way to something more deliberate, stonework that no natural process could explain. Joseph ran his fingers along symbols carved into the rock, familiar yet strange, like a dialect of Apache he'd never learned. As he ventured deeper, the tunnel forked. Joseph hesitated, then followed the path where the air felt slightly warmer. The passage narrowed before opening into a small chamber. His lantern light caught something gleaming in the corner, a bone whistle, delicately carved with intricate patterns. Joseph's grandmother had owned one similar, passed through generations, but this one looked impossibly preserved, its surface smooth as if recently polished. When he carefully lifted it, the whistle felt warm to the touch. Maya, the sound of his own voice startled him, echoing strangely in the confined space. It was the first word he'd spoken aloud in years, rusty and unfamiliar in his throat. No answer came, but as he turned to continue exploring, the light from his lantern caught movement in the shadows. Joseph froze, holding his breath. Not rats or insects, something else. The darkness itself seemed to shift and retreat from his light, like ink in water. The tunnels continued deeper, sloping gradually downward. Joseph tied a length of rope to a protruding rock, unwinding it behind him as he walked. Getting lost down here would mean certain death. The air grew colder as he descended, yet beads of sweat formed on his brow. Another chamber appeared, larger than the first. Here the walls bore elaborate pictographs, hunting scenes, ceremonial gatherings, and strange beings that seemed neither human nor animal. One image stopped Joseph cold, a circular arrangement of figures surrounding a small form. A child. His hand trembled as he raised the lantern higher, illuminating the entire scene. The paintings depicted a ritual, the small figure at its center, lying on what appeared to be an altar. Joseph's breath came in short gasps. He'd never believed the old stories his grandmother told, tales of ancient ones who lived beneath the earth, who sometimes took children as messengers between worlds. A sudden sound broke the silence, a faint melodic humming, the kind of tune a child might sing while playing. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Maya," he called again, louder this time, his voice bouncing off stone walls. The humming stopped abruptly. Then, impossibly, a child's laugh echoed through the chamber, receding down one of the 3 tunnels that branched from the room. Joseph followed without hesitation, moving faster now, his caution overwhelmed by desperate hope. The bone whistle grew warmer in his pocket, as if responding to his quickened pulse. The passage twisted and turned, leading deeper into the earth. Eventually it opened into a vast cavern that his lantern couldn't fully illuminate. The ceiling rose beyond the reach of his light, lost in darkness. In the center of the cavern stood a stone structure, not natural, but built with precision. A circular platform raised about 3 feet off the ground, with symbols carved around its circumference that matched those on the whistle. Joseph approached slowly. Upon the platform lay a small turquoise pendant on a leather cord, identical to the one Maya had been wearing in her birthday photo, the one missing when they found her body. His hand shook violently as he reached for it. The moment his fingers touched the smooth stone, the temperature in the cavern plummeted. His breath clouded in front of him, the lantern flame flickering dangerously low. From the darkness beyond the platform came the sound of small footsteps, circling, never quite visible in the lantern's diminishing light. "Who's there?" Joseph called, clutching the pendant. "Show your..." The bone whistle in his pocket began to vibrate, then emit a low, sustained note without being blown. The sound grew, filling the chamber, causing loose soil to rain down from above. Joseph stumbled backward as the ground beneath the platform began to crack. The stone circle split, revealing another passage, leading straight down, a perfect circular shaft, disappearing into blackness. From its depths came a child's voice, unmistakably Maya's. "Come find me, Daddy. But be careful, they're listening." The whistle fell silent. The lantern steadied. Joseph stood at the edge of the newly revealed shaft, the pendant clutched so tightly in his palm that it drew blood. Whatever awaited him below, he knew with absolute certainty that he would descend. But first, he needed to prepare. This was no natural formation, no coincidental discovery. Something had been waiting for him to find this place. Something had taken his daughter, and perhaps, in some impossible way, she was still here. The knock on Joseph's door came just after dawn. He hadn't slept, spending the night alternating between staring at Maya's pendant and sketching what he'd seen in the tunnels. His hands were dirt-stained, his eyes bloodshot. Sheriff Dan Blackwood stood on the porch, his weathered face a mask of professional concern. A cardboard box of groceries balanced on his hip. This monthly delivery was the town's way of checking that Joseph was still alive without forcing conversation upon him. "Morning, Joseph," the sheriff said, setting the box down. He glanced at Joseph's disheveled appearance. "Everything all right out here?" Joseph nodded, though nothing had been all right for 7 years. "Mind if I come in? Got something to discuss." Joseph stepped aside, allowing the older man to enter. The sheriff had been kind after Maya's death, handled the arrangements when Joseph couldn't function, kept the curious and well-meaning at bay. Blackwood's eyes swept the room, noting the scattered papers covered with tunnel drawings. "Been busy, I see." He picked up one sketch, studying it with an expression Joseph couldn't quite read. "Found something under your house?" Joseph hesitated, then nodded. From his jacket, Sheriff Blackwood produced a leather-bound journal, worn and faded with age. "Thought you might. That's why I brought this." Joseph accepted the journal cautiously. "Belonged to my grandfather," Blackwood explained. "He was sheriff here too, back in the 40s. Kept records of things the official books don't mention." He tapped the journal, "Including what's under this land." Joseph opened it, finding yellowed pages filled with meticulous handwriting, diagrams of tunnel systems, accounts of strange occurrences, mentions of children who wandered too far from town and returned changed, or didn't return at all. "Your property sits on what my grandfather called thin ground," Blackwood continued, "place where the barrier between worlds doesn't hold right." He cleared his throat. "Apache knew it long before settlers came. They avoided building here." Joseph's eyes fixed on a page describing a network of tunnels discovered in 1944, after a sinkhole opened on what was now his land. The account mentioned ritualistic chambers and evidence of ceremonial practices of unknown origin. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Joseph's voice was hoarse from disuse. Blackwood sighed. "What would it have changed? Your girl was gone. Knowing about this wouldn't have brought her back." He gestured at the journal. Besides, my grandfather sealed those tunnels, dynamited the entrances. They weren't supposed to be accessible anymore. Joseph pulled Maya's pendant from his pocket, letting it dangle between them. I found this down there. It was hers. The sheriff's face drained of color. That's not possible. She was wearing it the day she disappeared. It wasn't on her when... Joseph couldn't finish. Blackwood took the pendant, examining it closely. Joseph, this wasn't just missing when we found her. It was in evidence lockup at the station. His eyes met Joseph's. Has been for 7 years. Cold dread settled in Joseph's stomach. Then what did I find? The sheriff returned the pendant, his hand trembling slightly. I don't know, but my grandfather wrote about objects appearing in those tunnels, things that belonged to the missing, things that couldn't possibly be there. Joseph flipped through more pages until a sketch caught his eye, a circular stone platform with a shaft beneath, nearly identical to what he'd discovered. The old ones called it Echo Chamber, Blackwood said, noticing where Joseph's attention had landed, place where the past plays back like a recording, or so they believed. He took a deep breath. Joseph, whatever you think you heard down there, I heard Maya. Joseph interrupted. She spoke to me. Blackwood's expression hardened. That's what it wants you to think. He tapped the journal again. Every account in here, every single one, mentions hearing loved ones calling from the deep chambers. Those who followed the voices never returned. From his other pocket, the sheriff produced an official-looking envelope, placing it on the table. This is why I really came. Medical examiner's report on Maya. I kept it from you back then. Thought it would only cause more pain. Joseph stared at the envelope, afraid to touch it. Official cause was drowning, Blackwood said quietly. What I kept back was the rest. Maya had cave soil under her fingernails, in her hair, lungs. His voice grew softer. Symbols drawn on her skin that washed away in the creek. Matches those in your drawings. Joseph's world tilted. She was in the tunnels before she died. Blackwood nodded gravely, and something followed her out. He placed a heavy hand on Joseph's shoulder. Whatever you found down there, whatever you think you heard, leave it buried, Joseph. For your sake, for hers. As the sheriff turned to leave, he paused at the door. That journal tells the whole story. Read it before you go back down. His eyes were haunted. If you still want to after that, I can't stop you, but neither can I help you. The door closed behind him, leaving Joseph alone with a journal full of horrors and a pendant that couldn't possibly exist. Night had fallen by the time Joseph finished reading the sheriff's grandfather's journal. The accounts spanned decades, descriptions of tunnels that seemed to change configuration, of strange acoustic phenomena, of children drawn to the thin places in the land. Most disturbing were the detailed records of 5 children who had gone missing between 1932 and 1949, all found in Willow Creek just like Maya, all with the same inexplicable soil and markings. Despite Blackwood's warning, Joseph knew he would return to the tunnels. If Maya had been there before her death, if something had called her there, he needed to understand why. What connected his daughter to those other children across decades? He gathered supplies methodically, stronger lanterns, more rope, water, food. This time he added the sheriff's journal and a camera. If what he found matched the historical accounts, he wanted evidence. As Joseph descended the cellar steps, he felt the bone whistle in his pocket grow warm again. He'd been unable to produce any sound from it himself, yet it had played its eerie note in the cavern below. In the beam of his lantern, Joseph noticed something he'd overlooked before, a small carved stone mask mounted on the wall where the tunnel began. No larger than his palm, it depicted a face neither human nor animal, with hollow eyes that seemed to follow his movement. According to the journal, such masks marked the boundaries between the ordinary world and sacred spaces. Joseph photographed it before carefully removing it from the wall. The mask felt unnaturally heavy for its size. The stone cooled despite the warmth of the tunnel. When he turned it over, He found symbols etched on the back, matching those he'd seen on Maya's drawing. Pocketing the mask, Joseph made his way deeper, following his previous path marked by the rope he'd left behind. The tunnels seemed different somehow, wider in places he remembered as narrow, with new branches where there had been solid wall before. He reached the chamber with the pictographs and stopped. The images had changed. Where before he'd seen a ritual with a child at its center, now the wall showed the aftermath, the child rising while adults around the circle lay prone on the ground. A trade, the journal had called it, a life exchanged for life. Cold sweat beaded on Joseph's forehead. The rational part of his mind insisted paint couldn't rearrange itself, that he must have misremembered or seen what grief wanted him to see. But the journal had warned of this too, the tunnels showing different truths to different observers, or changing their appearance between visits. Joseph continued to the large cavern with the circular platform. The shaft that had opened beneath it gaped like a mouth, still beckoning. He secured his rope to the edge of the platform and tested its strength before beginning his descent into the vertical passage. The shaft extended about 30 feet before opening into another tunnel. Here, the construction changed dramatically, no longer rough-hewn rock, but precisely cut stone blocks, fitted together without mortar. The air felt different too, carrying a faint sweet scent like sage mixed with something metallic. Joseph's lantern revealed a long corridor lined with alcoves. Each contained small piles of objects, toys, clothes, jewelry, arranged with careful precision. Offerings, Joseph realized, or possessions. His breath caught when he spotted a faded hair ribbon, identical to one Maya had worn. At the corridor's end stood a stone door carved with concentric circles. At its center was an impression the exact size and shape of the mask. In Joseph's pocket, his hand trembled as he fit the stone face into the depression. The door swung inward silently, revealing a perfectly circular room. Its domed ceiling glittered with embedded crystals that caught and magnified Joseph's lantern light. At the center stood a stone table, its surface inscribed with a spiraling pattern that drew the eye inward. On the table lay a small wooden flute, decorated with turquoise inlay and feathers. Joseph recognized it instantly. He had carved it for Maya's 6th birthday. She'd been learning to play when she died. As Joseph approached, his boot disturbed something on the ground. Looking down, he saw a child's footprint in the fine dust, perfectly preserved. Too small for Maya at 7. It looked fresh. Behind him, the stone door swung shut with a decisive thud. The bone whistle in his pocket began to vibrate, then to wail, a high, keening sound that made Joseph's teeth ache and his vision blur. The flute on the table rose an inch into the air, hovering as if held by invisible hands. A soft melody began to play, the simple tune Joseph had taught Maya, performed with a child's halting skill. From all around the room, whispers rose like a tide. Dozens of children's voices, speaking in unison. "You shouldn't have come back, Daddy. Now they know you can hear us too." Joseph stumbled out of the tunnels as dawn broke, his mind reeling from what he'd witnessed. The flute had played for hours, sometimes Maya's simple tune, sometimes melodies he didn't recognize. Older, more complex. The voices had fallen silent after their warning, leaving only the music and the weight of unseen presences surrounding him. When the stone door had suddenly reopened, Joseph had fled, clutching Maya's flute to his chest. Now, in the harsh light of morning, the previous night seemed dreamlike, yet the flute in his hands was undeniably real. He needed answers beyond what the sheriff's journal provided. After a quick shower to wash away the tunnel dust, Joseph drove into town for the first time in months. White Clay was a small community of about 2,000 souls, its main street lined with false-fronted buildings, dating back to the 8th. People stared as Joseph parked his truck outside the county library. He'd once been a fixture here, crafting furniture for half the businesses in town. Now he was practically a stranger. The library occupied a Victorian building at the end of Main Street, As Joseph climbed the steps, he spotted a tarnished brass plaque he'd never paid attention to before. Founded on the covenant of the sheriff's journal had mentioned a covenant, some agreement between the original settlers and something older than them. Inside, the library was cool and quiet. At the front desk sat Martha Whitefeather, a Navajo woman in her 70s who had been the town librarian for as long as Joseph could remember. Her eyes widened at the sight of him. "Joseph, Running Deer," she said softly. "Never thought I'd see you walk through that door again." "Need information, Martha. About the land my house sits on. About the tunnels." Martha's face drained of color. She glanced around the empty library before beckoning him closer. "Come with me." She led him through the stacks to a locked door marked "Local History, Staff Only." Inside was a small room lined with glass-fronted cabinets containing aged documents and artifacts. "Town council doesn't like people poking into these records," Martha said, closing the door behind them. "Especially outsiders. I'm hardly an outsider. My family's been here 3 generations. 3 generations isn't even a blink to this land, Joseph." Martha unlocked a cabinet and removed a rolled parchment, yellowed with age. "This is what you're looking for, though I doubt you'll like what it tells you." She carefully unrolled it on the reading table. It was a hand-drawn map, dated 1887, showing the original town boundaries. Joseph's property was marked with a symbol he recognized from the tunnels, concentric circles with a spiral at the center. "The founders called it the Gateway," Martha explained. "Your land sits at the center of something the Apache knew about long before white men arrived. My people knew of it too, though we stayed far from that place." She tapped the map. "The DNA have stories of passages to the underworld, places where the membrane between worlds grows thin." Joseph placed the stone mask on the table. "Like this?" Martha recoiled. "Where did you find that?" "In the tunnels beneath my house. There are chambers down there, Martha, and something that speaks with my daughter's voice." Martha's gnarled fingers hovered over the mask, without touching it. "This is a guardian face. Apache shamans use them to walk between worlds, to speak with ancestors." Her eyes met his. "Or to bind spirits to specific places." She turned back to the cabinet and retrieved a leather folder tied with string. "These are newspaper clippings the town council tried to destroy decades ago. Records of children gone missing over the years, always the same pattern." Joseph untied the folder with trembling hands. Inside were dozens of yellowed clippings dating back to the 1880s, children ranging from 5 to 12 years old. All gone missing, all eventually found in Willow Creek. The similarities to Maya's death were unmistakable. One headline from 1932 caught his eye. "Local child returns from week-long disappearance, claims to have lived with underground people." The article described a 9-year-old boy found wandering near Joseph's property, babbling about tunnels and beings that were shadows with voices like music. The boy had died 3 days later from what doctors called nervous exhaustion. "There's a pattern," Martha said quietly. "Every generation the gateway demands passage. A child sensitive to the old ways." She looked at him with sad eyes. "Maya was drawing the tunnels before she disappeared, wasn't she?" Heard voices calling her. Joseph nodded numbly, remembering the drawing from Maya's medicine box. "Why didn't anyone warn us? The town protects its secret. Prosperity for silence." Martha gestured around them. "No drought ever touches our crops. No economic downturn affects our businesses. The covenant ensures that." "A covenant with what?" "The old ones who lived here before any human walked this land. They require acknowledgement, tribute." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "The town council selects the families, Joseph. They chose yours." Joseph's hands clenched. "Are you saying Maya's death wasn't an accident? That someone led her to those tunnels?" Martha looked away. "I'm saying there are no accidents in White Clay. Not when it comes to children and the gateway." She gathered the documents, returning them to their cabinet. "The answers you seek are in the town records office. The original covenant document is kept there. She pressed a small iron key into his palm. This opens the records room. Go tonight, after midnight. As Joseph left the library, the weight of the key in his pocket felt as heavy as the stone mask. The peaceful town around him suddenly seemed like a facade, hiding something monstrous, a community built on sacrificed children. Joseph sat in his truck outside the town records office, watching as white clay grew quiet and dark. The building was a squat brick structure behind the courthouse, unassuming and easy to overlook. Just past midnight, he slipped from his vehicle and approached the side entrance Martha had described. The iron key slid into the lock with surprising ease. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and dust. Joseph moved carefully through the darkened room, his flashlight beam catching rows of filing cabinets and shelves lined with leather-bound volumes. In the back corner stood an ornate wooden cabinet with a carved door noticeably finer than the utilitarian furniture surrounding it. The cabinet was locked, but the same key that opened the building worked here as well. Inside, Joseph found a single item, a leather document case, stamped with the town seal and the date 1887. His hands trembled as he carried it to a reading table and carefully opened the flap. Inside was a document written on parchment in faded ink, bearing signatures and wax seals at the bottom. The Covenant of White Clay. As Joseph began to read, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The covenant spoke of the town founders, discovering ancient ones dwelling beneath the land, beings neither divine nor demonic, but older than human understanding. These entities offered prosperity, protection from natural disaster, and abundant harvests in exchange for acknowledgement of their domain and periodic tribute. The nature of this tribute was specified in clinical terms. A natural sensitive, one who hears the voices beyond the veil, shall be guided to the gateway when the cycle demands renewal. The child's essence shall sustain the balance between worlds. Bile rose in Joseph's throat. The document detailed the method of selection, identifying children who displayed signs of receptivity such as speaking of voices, drawing symbols they couldn't have seen, or sleepwalking toward the gateway property. A loose page slipped from between the parchment sheets, a more recent edition typewritten and dated just 3 years before Maya's death. It was a memorandum listing potential candidates for the next tribute. Maya's name headed the list, with notations about her strong receptivity and ideal age range. Joseph's vision blurred with rage and grief. This wasn't superstition or coincidence. The town had deliberately identified his daughter, somehow exposed her to the influence of whatever lived in those tunnels. They had sacrificed her for their prosperity. As he was about to return the documents to their case, Joseph noticed something else inside. A small silver pocket watch. He removed it carefully, turning it over in his palm. The back was engraved with an inscription, "To Gabriel Weber, Guardian." Joseph recognized the name from the sheriff's journal, one of the town council members who had helped seal the tunnels in the 1940s after complications with the arrangement. The watch was stopped at 3:17, the time of Maya's death. A floorboard creaked behind him. Joseph spun around, flashlight beam cutting through darkness to illuminate a tall figure, standing in the doorway. "I wondered if you'd find your way here eventually," the man said, stepping into the light. He was elderly but stood straight, his white hair neatly combed, his suit immaculate despite the late hour. Most parents don't investigate this deeply. Their grief consumes them too completely. "Who are you?" Joseph demanded, pocketing the watch. "Dr. Elias Weber, town historian," the man smiled thinly, "and grandson of Gabriel Weber, whose watch you just helped yourself to." Joseph tensed, ready to defend himself, but Weber raised his hands placatingly. "I'm not here to stop you, Mr. Running Deer. Quite the opposite." He gestured to the covenant document. "I've spent decades trying to end this abomination my grandfather helped perpetuate." "You knew about Maya?" Joseph's voice was dangerously quiet. Weber's face showed genuine regret. "I suspected she had been selected. Yes. I tried to warn your wife, but the council intervened. He sighed heavily. Elena didn't believe me anyway. Few do, until it's too late. Elena knew. The betrayal cut deep. Not everything, just that Maya might be in danger, that she should be watched carefully. Weber approached slowly. I've studied the tunnels my entire life, Mr. Running Deer. The entities that dwell there, the pact that feeds them. There's more to this than you've discovered. Tell me, Joseph demanded. Not here. Weber glanced nervously at the windows. The council has eyes everywhere. They know you've been asking questions. He pulled a business card from his pocket. Come to this address tomorrow at noon. I have research you need to see. Materials that never made it into official records. Joseph studied the card, an address on the outskirts of town. Why should I trust you? Weber reached into his coat and withdrew an object that made Joseph's blood freeze. A small turquoise bracelet, identical to one he had made for Maya's last birthday. Because I've been in the chambers you've only begun to discover, Weber said quietly. I've heard the children too, and I know something you don't yet. He placed the bracelet on the table between them. The tribute isn't what you think. The children aren't just sacrificed, Mr. Running Deer. He leaned closer, his voice barely audible. Part of them remains below, conscious, waiting, and after all this time, they want to come home. Dr. Weber's home stood on a hill overlooking White Clay, a Victorian structure with a widow's walk and wraparound porch. As Joseph parked his truck in the circular driveway, he noted the property's strategic view of both the town and his own land in the distance. Weber answered the door before Joseph could knock, looking considerably older in daylight. Thank you for coming, he said, leading Joseph through a foyer lined with archaeological displays and Native American artifacts. My life's work is in these rooms. My atonement, you might say. The study they entered was circular, walls covered with maps and photographs of the tunnel system. Glass cases displayed artifacts similar to those Joseph had found below his house. Academic credentials hung alongside old photographs of Weber's family, including one showing a young Gabriel Weber with the town council of 1923. You said you've been in the deeper chambers, Joseph said, dispensing with pleasantries. That you've heard the children. Heard Maya. Weber nodded gravely. I've spent 50 years documenting what lies beneath White Clay. He unlocked a cabinet and removed a stone tablet about the size of a dinner plate. This was excavated from the lowest chamber in 1963, before the council sealed that entrance too. The tablet was carved with intricate symbols surrounding a central image, a childlike figure suspended in what appeared to be a web of lines connecting to adult figures above ground. My translation is imperfect, Weber explained, but the essence is clear. The entities below, the hollow ones as the Apache called them, cannot manifest in our world. They exist in a state between matter and energy, requiring a conduit to affect our reality. He tapped the child figure on the tablet. A young, receptive mind serves as that bridge. You're saying they take the children to use them? Joseph felt sick. In a manner of speaking, the child's consciousness becomes a vessel. Their physical form is discarded, returned to the creek as we've seen, but their essence remains below. Weber's fingers traced the web of lines on the tablet, connected to the town through the covenant. Every child taken strengthens the bond, channels more prosperity to those above. Joseph thought of Maya's voice in the tunnels, the flute playing by itself. They're still aware down there, still alive. Not alive as we understand it, but not gone either. Weber adjusted his glasses. I believe the entities preserve the children's consciousness as part of the exchange, a form of spiritual technology beyond our comprehension. How do you know all this? Joseph demanded. Weber's expression darkened. Because my own sister was taken in 1933. Emily, she was 6. He moved to a photograph on his desk, a small blonde girl with ribbons in her hair. My grandfather was town mayor there. He helped select her, his own granddaughter, to demonstrate his loyalty to the Covenant. Joseph studied the old man with new understanding. That's why you're helping me. Guilt. Justice. Weber corrected. For Emily, for Maya, for all of them. The Covenant can be broken, Mr. Running Deer. The children freed. But it requires someone the entities will communicate with. He fixed Joseph with a penetrating stare. Someone like you. What makes you think they'll talk to me? You heard Maya in the tunnels. The mask responded to you. The whistle played for you. Weber leaned forward, and more importantly, you have Apache blood. The entities respected the Apache, communicated with their shamans. It's why the town selected your daughter. Her heritage made her an ideal vessel. Joseph clenched his fists. They targeted Maya because she was Apache. Partially, the council has a methodology developed over generations. They look for children with specific traits: artistic sensitivity, tendency toward vivid dreams, connection to indigenous spiritual traditions. Weber sighed. Maya checked every box. The perfect candidate. From a drawer, Weber produced a small cloth-wrapped bundle. There's one more thing you should see. I retrieved this from the chamber where the most recent rituals took place. Joseph unwrapped the cloth to find a child's leather moccasin, intricately beaded with a sunburst pattern. His throat tightened. I made these for her 7th birthday. It's untouched by time, Weber noted. Nothing decays in the lower chambers. Physics operates differently there. Joseph turned the tiny moccasin in his hands, remembering Maya's delight when she'd opened the gift. You said the Covenant can be broken. How? The ritual must be reversed. A willing sacrifice must take the place of the children. Weber's voice grew somber. Someone must enter the central chamber on the night of the solstice, 3 days from now, and offer themselves to the Hollow Ones and the children. What happens to them? If my research is correct, their essences would be freed, released from the tunnels. Weber hesitated, but I cannot guarantee what state they would return in, or where their spirits would go. Joseph clutched the moccasin. You're asking me to sacrifice myself on a theory. I'm offering you the only chance to free your daughter. Weber's eyes were sympathetic but firm. The alternative is to leave her consciousness trapped in those tunnels forever, serving as a conduit for entities that see humanity as nothing but a resource to exploit. Joseph slipped the moccasin into his pocket. I need to see more proof. I need to go deeper into the tunnels, find Maya, speak with her directly. Weber nodded. I can help you. I have detailed maps of the lower chambers, equipment for a proper expedition. He checked his watch. An exact twin to the one Joseph had found in the records office. We should prepare immediately. The council knows you're investigating. They'll move to stop you, to protect their arrangement. Let them try, Joseph said, a cold determination settling over him. 7 years of grief, crystallized into purpose. I'm going to bring my daughter home. Joseph was loading Weber's equipment into his truck when a familiar car pulled into the driveway. His heart constricted as Elena stepped out, her dark hair shorter than he remembered, her face thinner. 7 years had changed her, just as they had changed him. Martha called me, she said simply. Said you were asking questions about Maya, about the tunnels. Joseph hadn't seen his wife since she'd left. They'd communicated through lawyers' brief impersonal exchanges to finalize their separation. Now she stood before him, and all the practiced indifference he'd cultivated crumbled away. You should have come inside, Weber said, emerging from the house. Joseph has learned quite a lot today. Elena's eyes narrowed. Dr. Weber, I should have known you'd be involved. Her gaze returned to Joseph. Whatever he's told you, be careful. He has his own agenda. You knew, Joseph said, the words like stones. Before Maya died, Weber warned you she was in danger. Elena's composure faltered. He came to me with wild stories about town conspiracies and supernatural entities. What was I supposed to believe? Pain flashed across her face. I thought he was just a senile old man. Yet here you are, Weber observed. Something brought you back to Whiteclay after all these years. From her bag, Elena withdrew a small wooden box with intricate carvings. Joseph recognized it immediately, the twin to the medicine box he kept in his home, made from the same fallen oak, a matching set he had crafted when Maya was born. "This arrived at my apartment in Tucson 3 days ago," Elena said. "No postmark, no return address." She opened the box. Inside lay a perfect origami crane folded from white paper, identical to the ones Maya used to make. Beside it was a Polaroid photograph, showing the entrance to the tunnels beneath Joseph's house, dated the previous week. The paper crane moved, Elena said, her voice barely audible. "At night, when I was sleeping, I'd wake to find it in different positions. Last night, I found it like this." She touched the crane gently with one finger. Its paper head was turned toward a crude drawing in the corner of the box. A simple house with a stick figure family, mother, father, daughter. Joseph felt a chill move through him. "Maya used to fold these. I taught her how." "I know who made it, Joseph." Elena's voice broke. "I can feel her in it. That's why I came back, to find out what happened to our daughter." Weber studied the origami crane with academic interest. Fascinating. A manifestation outside the tunnel system. The entities must be growing stronger, extending their influence. "Or Maya is," Joseph said quietly. "She's trying to reach both of us." Elena looked between them. "What exactly have you discovered?" Joseph explained everything. The tunnels, the covenant, the town's conspiracy, the children's preserved consciousness. With each revelation, Elena's expression shifted from skepticism to horror, to a grief as raw as the day Maya disappeared. "I don't understand," she finally said. "Why would the town do this? Why Maya?" "Prosperity," Weber replied clinically. "Protection from drought, disease, economic hardship. White Clay has thrived while neighboring communities struggled. The council believes the benefits outweigh the cost. One child every generation," Joseph added bitterly. Maya was the perfect candidate. Apache heritage, artistic sensitivity, vivid dreams. They manipulated her. Elena led her to those tunnels somehow. Elena closed the box, her knuckles white. "How do we stop it? How do we get her back?" Weber explained his theory here, reversing the ritual on the solstice, the possibility of freeing the children's essences through a willing sacrifice. Elena listened with growing alarm. "You can't seriously be considering this," she said to Joseph. "Sacrificing yourself." On his word, she turned to Weber. "You've been chasing these theories for decades. How many times have you been wrong?" "This is different," Weber insisted. "I've never had someone who could communicate with the entities. Someone with Apache blood who's heard the children's voices." "I need to be sure," Joseph said. "I need to go deeper, find Maya, speak with her." He met Elena's eyes. "I need to know if she can be saved." Elena was silent for a long moment. "Then I'm coming with you," she finally said, her tone brooking no argument. "She's my daughter too." Weber began to protest, but Elena silenced him with a look. "I left once when my family needed me. I won't make that mistake again." Joseph nodded slowly. He had faced the tunnels alone, driven by grief and guilt. The thought of Elena beside him, her strength, her determination kindled something he had thought long extinguished. Hope. "We'll go tonight," he decided. All three of them. As they finished loading the equipment, Joseph noticed Elena had kept the wooden box close, tucked into her jacket pocket. The origami crane inside, Maya's message from beyond, had brought her mother back to White Clay. Now it would guide them all into the darkness beneath. Night fell quickly, darkness settling over Joseph's property like a shroud. Weber had arrived with professional caving equipment, helmets with mounted lights, climbing harnesses, communication devices. Elena had changed into practical clothing, her face set with determination that reminded Joseph of when they'd first met. Her quiet strength, one of the qualities that had drawn him to her. "The maps show 3 main levels to the tunnel system," Weber explained, spreading detailed drawings across Joseph's kitchen table. "You've explored the upper chambers, but the middle and lower levels contain the ritual spaces where the covenant is maintained." Joseph traced the route with his finger. "This central shaft, is this where I found the platform?" Weber nodded. "The gateway proper. It connects all 3 levels. The lowest chamber is where the actual transfer occurs, where the children's consciousness is separated from their physical form. Elena flinched at his clinical description. And you believe Maya is where exactly? The entities preserve the children's essences in the lowest chambers. The holding place, according to Apache legends. Weber adjusted his glasses. But they can project throughout the system. What Joseph heard could have been an echo, a projection, or Maya herself trying to communicate. They descended into the tunnels with Joseph leading, followed by Elena, with Weber bringing up the rear. The older man moved with surprising agility for his age, explaining that he'd been exploring cave systems for decades. The upper tunnels were as Joseph remembered, though Elena gasped at the pictographs showing ritual scenes. Weber photographed everything methodically, maintaining a researcher's detachment that Joseph found both useful and disturbing. At the circular platform, they prepared to descend the vertical shaft. Joseph secured the ropes while Weber checked the anchors. Elena stood at the edge, her light illuminating the darkness below. "I hear something," she whispered. "Music." Joseph paused, listening. A faint melody drifted up from the depths, Maya's flute, playing the tune he had taught her. "She knows we're here," he said softly. "All of us." The descent was tense but manageable with Weber's equipment. They emerged into a tunnel much larger than those above, its walls smooth and precisely carved, more like architecture than natural formation. Alcoves lined the passage, each containing small collections of personal items, toys, clothing, jewelry, offerings, Weber explained, or possessions left behind. Each alcove represents a child taken over the generations. Elena stopped before one containing a small red ball and a child's drawing of a house. "These things are decades old, but they look new." She reached toward the ball but stopped short of touching it. "Time works differently down here," Weber said. "The entities exist partially outside our temporal reality. They continue deeper, following the sound of the flute." The tunnel opened into a vast circular chamber with a domed ceiling embedded with luminescent crystals that gave off a soft blue glow. At the center stood a raised dais, surrounded by stone benches arranged in a circle. "The council chamber," Weber whispered, "where the town elders would meet with the entity's vessels, the taken children, to renew the covenant." Joseph approached the dais cautiously. Carved into its surface was a detailed map of white clay, every building and street rendered in perfect miniature. At the center, where his property would be, a small crystal pulsed with light. "Look," Elena gasped, pointing to the edges of the map. Names were inscribed around the perimeter, dozens of them, with dates spanning centuries. The children taken as tribute. Joseph found Maya's name, carved in fresh-looking letters, the date of her death beside it. As Elena touched her daughter's name, the flute music stopped abruptly. The temperature in the chamber plummeted, their breath clouding before them. "We're being watched," Weber said, his voice tight with anticipation. "They know we're here." From the shadows beyond the dais emerged a small wooden doll, walking with jerky puppet-like movements across the stone floor. Its face was blank, featureless, yet somehow familiar in its proportion. Joseph recognized it instantly. The unfinished doll he had been carving for Maya's 8th birthday, abandoned in his workshop after her death. But something was different. The doll now wore a tiny dress made from fabric he recognized, a scrap from Maya's favorite nightgown. The doll stopped at the edge of the dais and raised its wooden arm, pointing to a previously unseen doorway on the far side of the chamber. "She wants us to follow," Elena whispered, her voice a mixture of terror and hope. Weber consulted his maps with shaking hands. "That passage isn't on any of my charts. It shouldn't exist." The doll turned its blank face toward them, waiting. From the indicated passage came Maya's voice, clear and unmistakable. "Hurry, before they know you're here, before they stop you from seeing." Joseph exchanged a glance with Elena. Whatever fear they felt was overshadowed by the need to find their daughter. Weber hesitated, clutching his maps. "You can stay here," Joseph told him. The old man shook his head. "No, I've waited too long for this moment. He folded his maps decisively. But be warned, if this passage isn't on any chart, we're entering territory unknown even to me. The doll began to move again, walking jerkily toward the mysterious doorway. With Maya's voice echoing in their minds, they followed the wooden guide into darkness beyond Weber's carefully documented knowledge, beyond the reaches of the Covenant, into the true heart of the entity's domain. The unmapped passage narrowed as they followed the wooden doll, its jerky movements casting eerie shadows in their helmet lights. Unlike the precisely carved tunnels before, this corridor seemed almost organic, its walls undulating like frozen waves. Joseph led the way, Elena close behind him, with Weber bringing up the rear, muttering about structural anomalies and recording observations into a small tape recorder. After what seemed like hours, the passage opened into a small, perfectly circular room. Unlike the Grand Council chamber, this space felt intimate, almost like a child's bedroom. The walls were covered with drawings, hundreds of them, overlapping, rendered in what looked like colored chalk. Joseph recognized Maya's artistic style immediately, the distinctive way she drew people with oversized hands and detailed fingers. Maya made these, Elena whispered, touching one drawing that showed their family standing together outside their house. Not just Maya, Weber said, examining the artwork with his flashlight. Look at the different styles, the varying heights. These were made by all the children. The wooden doll had stopped in the center of the room where a small stone pedestal stood. Atop it sat a peculiar object, a kaleidoscope crafted from polished copper and inlaid with turquoise and shell. The doll raised its wooden arm, pointing to the device. Joseph approached cautiously. I've never seen this before. I have, Elena said softly. Maya was drawing it for months before she died. I thought she'd seen it in a book. Weber examined the kaleidoscope without touching it. This is Apache craftsmanship, but with modifications. See these symbols etched around the eyepiece. They're not decorative. They're a form of written language I've never encountered. Joseph carefully lifted the kaleidoscope. It felt unexpectedly warm in his hands, thrumming with subtle energy. When he raised it to his eye, Elena grabbed his arm. Wait, we don't know what it does. I think we do, Joseph replied. It lets us see. He looked through the eyepiece. Instead of the colored patterns of a normal kaleidoscope, Joseph saw the room transformed. The children's drawings glowed with internal light, and faint translucent figures moved among them, small, child-sized shapes that flitted about like mist. One approached him, its form gradually resolving into a recognizable silhouette. Maya, he breathed. He passed the kaleidoscope to Elena, whose hands shook as she raised it to her eye. Her sharp intake of breath confirmed she saw the same phenomenon. There are dozens of them, she whispered. Children from every era. Weber took his turn, his academic detachment crumbling as he scanned the room. Extraordinary. A tool for perceiving the consciousness state of the taken children. His voice caught. Emily is here, my sister. The wooden doll suddenly collapsed, falling to the stone floor with a clatter. In its place stood the misty form of Maya, only partially visible to their naked eyes but unmistakably their daughter. You shouldn't have come, her voice echoed, seeming to emanate from the walls themselves. The Watchers know you're here now. Maya. Joseph reached toward her form, his hand passing through the translucent outline. We've come to take you home. Home. The word sounded hollow, distant. This is home now, for all of us. Elena stepped forward. We can free you. Dr. Weber knows how to break the covenant. Maya's form flickered. You don't understand. Breaking the covenant won't free us. It will just release them. Her voice dropped to a whisper. The Hollow Ones are not what the town believes, not what anyone believes. Weber adjusted his glasses nervously. What are they, Maya? They were like us once. Children, the first children taken, centuries ago before the town existed. Their spirits changed over time, forgotten who they were. Maya's form drifted toward the far wall, where the drawing showed dark, elongated figures looming over smaller ones. They've been trapped so long, they've become something else. Something hungry. A deep rumbling shook the chamber, dust falling from the ceiling. "They're coming," Maya said urgently. "You have to see the truth before they stop you." She pointed to a narrow opening that had appeared in the wall. "Through there. Quickly. Maya, come with us," Joseph pleaded. The girl's translucent form shook her head. "I can't leave this room. None of us can go beyond our boundaries." Her outline began to fade. "Find the archive. See what really happened. Why they need us." As Maya vanished, the wooden doll jerked back to life, scrambling toward the new opening with urgent puppet-like movements. Joseph clutched the kaleidoscope. "We're taking this with us." Weber nodded, glancing nervously at the ceiling as another rumble shook the chamber. "If the entities can change the tunnel configuration at will, we may not be able to find our way back without help." "What did she mean about an archive?" Elena asked as they squeezed through the narrow opening, following the doll. "I suspect we're about to find out," Weber replied grimly, "and I doubt the town council will be pleased." The rumbling grew louder behind them, the sound of stone grinding against stone. Joseph looked back to see the entrance to the drawing room closing, sealing itself as if it had never existed. Whatever lay ahead, there would be no turning back now. They hurried forward, guided by the frantic movements of the wooden doll, the kaleidoscope clutched tightly in Joseph's hand. Their only means of seeing the truth that had been hidden beneath white clay for generations. The passage twisted downward, narrowing until they had to proceed single file. The wooden doll scurried ahead, occasionally pausing as if listening for pursuers. Joseph kept the kaleidoscope close, periodically raising it to his eye to check for spiritual presence. Through its lens, he could see faint luminous trails along the walls, the paths of children who had traversed these tunnels before. "The architecture is changing," Weber observed, running his hand along the passage wall. "These markings are Spanish colonial. This section must Noldian lie at 1700s, before American settlement." "Look," Elena whispered, pointing ahead where the tunnel widened into a larger space. They emerged into what appeared to be a natural cavern that had been converted into a library of sorts. Stone shelves carved from the living rock lined the walls, filled with artifacts spanning centuries, clay tablets, leather-bound journals, scrolls, and more modern documents. A massive stone table occupied the center, its surface covered with maps, similar to the one they'd seen in the council chamber. "The archive," Weber breathed, his academic excitement momentarily overriding his fear. "Historical records kept by those who maintained the covenant." The wooden doll clambered onto the stone table and pointed insistently at a leather-bound book resting atop a pedestal in the corner. Unlike the other items in the room, this book was chained to the pedestal with links of a strange, iridescent metal that seemed to shift colors in their helmet lights. Joseph approached the book cautiously. It was bound in dark leather that felt unnaturally warm to the touch, with no title or markings on its cover. The chain holding it looked ancient yet unweathered, its links inscribed with symbols similar to those on the kaleidoscope. "I don't think we should touch that," Weber warned, but Joseph was already reaching for it. As his fingers contacted the cover, a pulse of energy surged through the room. The wooden doll froze in place. Through the kaleidoscope, Joseph saw dozens of spectral forms suddenly materialize around them, children of various ages from different historical periods, all watching with solemn expression. "They want us to see," Elena said softly, observing the spirits through the kaleidoscope they now shared between them. Joseph carefully opened the book. Instead of pages, it contained thin sheets of hammered copper inscribed with text in multiple languages, Apache, Spanish, English, overlapping, as if written by different hands over centuries. Most remarkable were the illustrations etched into the metal, detailed depictions of ritual practices, tunnel maps and anatomical drawings of human figures, with strange, energetic patterns surrounding them. "This is the original covenant," Weber said, his voice hushed with awe. "Not the version in the town records. the actual agreement with the entities. Joseph traced the inscriptions with his finger, finding that he could somehow understand languages he'd never studied. It says the first contact was in 1541. Spanish explorers found a cave system containing children, lost children who had been trapped underground during an earthquake decades earlier. Elena peered through the kaleidoscope at the spirits surrounding them. The original hollow ones. The children had changed. Joseph continued reading, existing in a state between life and death. They offered the Spanish protection and guidance in exchange for companionship. His voice hardened. They were lonely. They wanted more children to join them. Ribber leaned closer to the text. The covenant wasn't about prosperity originally. It was about providing playmates for these trapped children who had transformed into something else. Joseph turned several copper pages, the inscriptions becoming more formal, more bureaucratic as they reached the American settlement period. The town council reinterpreted the arrangement over time, started to view it as a transaction sacrifice for prosperity. They forgot the original purpose, or chose to forget, Elena said bitterly. It's easier to justify sacrificing children if you're doing it for the economic good of the community rather than to provide playmates for supernatural entities. Weber was examining the anatomical drawings with growing alarm. These illustrations show how the transformation works. The physical body is just a vessel. When a child with specific sensitivities enters the tunnels, the hollow ones can separate the consciousness from the physical form, preserving it here while the body, he couldn't finish, is returned to the creek. Joseph completed grimly. Maya didn't drown. She was already gone when her body was placed there. Elena stifled a sob. Can they be restored? Can the children be returned to their bodies? Joseph turned more pages, searching for answers. It says the separation is meant to be temporary, hours or days, but the town council began leaving the children below permanently, strengthening the connection between worlds. His finger stopped on a passage near the end. There's a ritual, a reversal process that can release the captured consciousnesses. Weber adjusted his glasses. The solstice ceremony I told you about? No. Joseph shook his head. Something different. It requires the blood of those who facilitated the taking, the town council members who selected the child. A thunderous boom echoed through the cavern, causing dust and small rocks to rain down from the ceiling. The wooden doll suddenly reanimated, gesturing frantically toward another exit tunnel. Through the kaleidoscope, Joseph saw the child's spirits dispersing in terror, as dark, elongated shadows crept along the edges of the room, shapes that seemed human but stretched and distorted, moving with unnatural fluidity. The Watchers, Elena whispered. We need to go. Joseph grabbed the chained book, but it wouldn't budge from the pedestal. In desperation, he tore out the copper page containing the reversal ritual and stuffed it into his pocket. As they fled toward the exit, following the wooden doll, Joseph glanced back to see the shadows converging on the book. Through the kaleidoscope, their true forms became visible. Children's spirits twisted and elongated by centuries of existence in the tunnels, their faces barely recognizable as human anymore. The archive guardians had discovered their presence, and they were in pursuit. They fled through twisting passages, the wooden doll scampering ahead with urgent purpose. Behind them, the walls themselves seemed to undulate as shadow forms pursued, not touching the ground, but flowing along surfaces like liquid darkness. Joseph clutched the copper page in one hand, the kaleidoscope in the other, while Elena and Weber struggled to keep pace. The tunnel's changing, Weber gasped as they ran. They're altering the configuration to trap us. The passage ahead forked suddenly, a junction that hadn't existed moments before. The wooden doll hesitated, its head swiveling between options before choosing the right-hand tunnel. As they followed, the left passage sealed itself with a grinding of stone, narrowly missing Weber's heels. They're herding us, Joseph realized. The tunnel widened into a chamber unlike any they'd seen, a perfect hemisphere with a floor of polished obsidian that reflected their movements like dark water. Embedded in the ceiling were hundreds of small crystals that glowed with soft blue light, illuminating the space without their helmet lamps. The dolls stopped at the chamber's center, collapsing into stillness once more. The pursuing shadows halted at the entrance, flowing around the perimeter, but not entering the space. "They can't come in here," Elena observed, catching her breath. "This place is protected somehow." Weber studied the crystal formation overhead. "These match the descriptions in my grandfather's notes. The Chamber of Echoes, where the town council would communicate directly with the entities during renewal ceremonies." Joseph raised the kaleidoscope to his eye. Through its lens, the chamber transformed. The obsidian floor became transparent, revealing hundreds of glowing orbs suspended in darkness below, pulsing with gentle light like submerged lanterns. "The children," he whispered, "all of them." Elena took the kaleidoscope, her hand trembling as she looked. "Maya's down there. I can feel her." At the chamber's far side, a section of wall shimmered and parted, revealing Sheriff Blackwood. His expression was grim as he stepped into the room, followed by 3 elderly men and women in formal attire. "Members of the town council," Joseph presumed. "I was hoping you wouldn't get this far," Blackwood said, his voice echoing in the domed space. "Makes everything more complicated." Joseph stepped protectively in front of Elena. "You knew about this all along. You helped them take Maya." The sheriff's weathered face showed genuine regret. "I've only been Keeper of the Covenant for 15 years, Joseph. But yes, I knew. We all know." He gestured to the council members. "It's our burden to bear." "Burden?" Elena's voice shook with rage. "You sacrificed our daughter." One of the councilwomen, white-haired and patrician, stepped forward. "We maintain the balance that keeps this town alive. One child every generation ensures prosperity for thousands." "They're not what you think," Joseph countered. "These entities, they were children once themselves. Trapped, transformed. You've been feeding them more victims for centuries." The council members exchanged uneasy glances. The sheriff's hand moved to his holster, where Joseph noticed something gleaming. Not a gun, but a ceremonial dagger, with a handle carved from bone. "The sentinel blade," Weber gasped, recognizing the weapon. "Used in the separation ritual." The sheriff lifted the dagger, its surface catching the blue crystal light. "This has been passed down through the keepers since the beginning. It doesn't harm the physical body. It severs the connection between consciousness and flesh." Through the kaleidoscope, Joseph could see dark energy swirling around the blade, not a physical object, but a metaphysical tool that existed in both realms simultaneously. "We know what you took from the archive," the councilwoman said. "The reversal ritual won't work. It was an early experiment that failed catastrophically in 8. "You're lying," Elena challenged. "You just don't want to sacrifice yourselves as the ritual requires." The sheriff sighed heavily. "Joseph, Elena, I am truly sorry about Maya, but what's done is done. She serves a greater purpose now." He raised the dagger. "Now you have a choice. Leave with Weber and forget what you've seen, or join your daughter below." Joseph's hand tightened around the copper page in his pocket. He glanced at the kaleidoscope in Elena's hand, then at the transparent floor revealing the children's consciousnesses below. Among them, he could distinguish a brighter light, Maya, reaching upward. "There's another option," he said quietly. "We complete the reversal ritual. Free all the children. End this covenant once and for all." The councilwoman laughed bitterly, "and doom Whiteclay to drought, poverty and ruin. That entities would withdraw their protection." "They're not protecting you out of benevolence," Weber interjected. "They're using you to capture more children, to expand their collection." The sheriff advanced slowly, the dagger glowing more intensely in his grip. "I'm sorry it's come to this, but the covenant must be maintained." As Blackwood approached, the wooden doll suddenly reanimated, throwing itself at the sheriff's feet. He stumbled, the ceremonial dagger slipping from his grasp and skittering across the obsidian floor toward Joseph. In that moment of confusion, the crystals overhead pulsed brightly. Through the kaleidoscope, Elena saw dozens of children's spirits materialize in the chamber, not the twisted watchers, but the more recently taken, Maya among them. The dagger slid to a stop at Joseph's feet. He picked it up cautiously, feeling its unnatural weight, the bone handle warm against his skin. Through the kaleidoscope, he could see its true form, a key of sorts, designed to unlock the boundary between physical and spiritual realms. "Don't touch that," the councilwoman shouted. "You don't know what you're doing." But Joseph did know. Somehow, holding the blade, he understood its purpose, not just to separate, but potentially to reunite. The copper page in his pocket seemed to burn with significance, the reversal ritual now making perfect sense. "We're taking Maya home," he said firmly, the dagger glowing in his hand as the children's spirits gathered around him. And all the others too. The sheriff lunged for Joseph, but froze mid-motion as the sentinel blade began to pulse with light. The council members backed away, their faces masks of terror. "You don't understand what you're holding," the white-haired councilwoman warned. "That blade connects to every child taken. Misuse it and you could destroy them all." Joseph felt the dagger thrumming in his hand, as if alive. Through the kaleidoscope, Elena could see threads of light extending from the blade, connecting to the glowing orbs below, hundreds of tendrils linking the ceremonial weapon to each captured consciousness. "We need to get out of here," Weber urged, eyeing the council members nervously. "The reversal ritual must be performed at the gateway, not here." The wooden doll sprang back to life, scurrying toward a previously unseen passage on the far side of the chamber. As they backed away from the sheriff and council, the shadows that had been hovering at the perimeter began to seep into the room, drawn to the glowing dagger. "The watchers sense the blade's activation," Weber explained as they retreated. "It's disturbing the balance they've maintained for centuries." They fled down the new passage, the doll leading the way through a maze of tunnels that seemed to shift and reconfigure around them. Behind, they could hear the sheriff and council members in pursuit, their voices echoing strangely as if coming from multiple directions at once. The passage suddenly opened into a small natural cavern where water dripped from stalactites into a perfectly circular pool. The doll stopped at the pool's edge, pointing insistently at the water's surface. Elena peered into the water. "There's something down there." Joseph knelt beside the pool, the sentinel blade still clutched in his hand. As he brought it near the water's surface, the liquid began to glow with the same blue light as the crystals in the echo chamber. "It's not water," Weber realized, touching it cautiously. His finger passed through the surface without resistance or wetness. "It's another boundary between realms." Elena held the kaleidoscope to her eye. "I can see a room below. It looks like Maya's bedroom." Joseph looked through the kaleidoscope and saw it too, a perfect replica of Maya's room as it had been 7 years ago, preserved like a museum exhibit. On the bed lay a small leather-bound book with a turquoise clasp, Maya's journal, which they had searched for after her death, but never found. "She kept that journal with her everywhere," Elena whispered. "I gave it to her for her 7th birthday." Joseph glanced back at the tunnel entrance, hearing the voices of their pursuers growing closer. "We need that journal. It might tell us what happened to her before she disappeared." "I'll go," Elena said firmly, already removing her pack and helmet. "I'm smaller and she was writing things to me in that journal that she wouldn't show anyone else." Before Joseph could protest, Elena had slipped into the glowing pool, passing through it as if it were a portal rather than liquid. Through the kaleidoscope, he could see her materialize in the bedroom below, moving toward the journal on the bed. The wooden doll suddenly became agitated, its movements frantic as it pointed toward the tunnel entrance. Sheriff Blackwood appeared, alone now, his expression grim but determined. "Step away from the memory well," he ordered, advancing slowly. "That's not for you to access." Joseph raised the sentinel blade defensively. "What is this place? What have you done with my daughter's things?" "The entities preserve everything connected to the children they take," Blackwood explained, his voice softening slightly. Personal spaces, belongings, memories, all stored below as anchors for their consciousness. Through the kaleidoscope, Joseph watched Ilana open the journal in the replica bedroom. As she turned the pages, her expression changed from hope to horror. Weber moved to Joseph's side. The sheriff's alone. The council members must have taken another route to cut us off. Blackwood continued his approach. The blade belongs to the Covenant, Joseph. It's not meant for outsiders to wield. This blade has been used to separate children from their bodies for centuries. Joseph countered, now it's going to help bring them home. The sheriff paused, something like regret crossing his weathered features. I didn't want Maya to be chosen. I argued against it in the council. His voice dropped lower. But the entities were specific. They wanted her. They'd never been so insistent about a particular child before. A splash behind Joseph signaled Elena's return through the memory well. She emerged, clutching Maya's journal, her face pale with shock. She knew, Elena said, her voice breaking. Maya knew they were coming for her. It's all in here. She held up the journal, its turquoise clasp glinting in the ethereal light. Names of council members, dates of previous takings, even drawings of the tunnels she'd never seen. How could she have known all that? Weber asked. She was being prepared, Blackwood admitted reluctantly. Chosen ones are influenced before they're taken. Dreams, visions, information they couldn't possibly know. It makes the separation easier when they finally enter the tunnels. Elena clutched the journal to her chest. You groomed my daughter, prepared her like livestock for slaughter. Joseph stepped toward the sheriff, the sentinel blade glowing brighter in his grip. Who chose her? Who specifically selected Maya from all the children in white clay? Blackwood's hand moved to his uniform pocket, withdrawing a folded document. The selection committee. Their signatures are all here. He held out the paper, including one you should recognize. Joseph took the document with his free hand, unfolding it to reveal a list of signatures at the bottom of an official-looking form. His blood ran cold as he recognized the final name on the list. Dr. Elias Weber. Joseph turned to Weber, who had gone very still, his academic detachment suddenly looking like a mask about to slip. You helped select Maya. After everything you told us about wanting to end the Covenant. Weber adjusted his glasses nervously. Joseph, there are complexities here you don't understand. I had to gain their trust to access the tunnels, to find Emily. You used our daughter as a sacrifice for your research, Elena said, her voice deadly quiet. To find your sister. The wooden doll suddenly leapt onto Weber's shoulder, its blank face pressing close to his, as if in accusation. Through the kaleidoscope, Joseph could see Maya's spirit hovering behind it, her expression one of betrayal and rage. The reversal ritual, Joseph said, the sentinel blade now pointing at Weber's heart. It requires the blood of those who facilitated the taking. That's why you were so eager to help us find it. Weber backed away, hands raised defensively. You still need me. I'm the only one who knows how to perform the ritual correctly. From the tunnel behind the sheriff came the sound of approaching footsteps, the council members, closing in from another direction. They were trapped between betrayal and pursuit, with Maya's journal clutched in Elena's hands, like a final piece of devastating evidence. Sheriff Blackwood's radio crackled to life, voices of the council members reporting their positions, closing the net around the cavern. Joseph gripped the sentinel blade tighter, while Elena leafed frantically through Maya's journal, searching for anything that might help them escape. There's a map in here, she suddenly exclaimed, turning the journal to show a detailed drawing of interconnected tunnels, with one passage highlighted in red crayon. Maya drew this 3 days before she disappeared. It shows a route back to the gateway. Weber stepped forward, his professional mask slipping to reveal desperation. Joseph, Elena, I did what I had to do. The council would never have allowed me access to the tunnels unless I participated in their rituals. I've spent decades searching for Emily. By sacrificing our daughter, Joseph said coldly. I didn't choose Maya specifically, Weber protested. I only agreed to be on the committee. The entities themselves selected her. His eyes pleaded for understanding. I've been trying to make amends to find a way to free all the children, including Emily, including Maya. The sheriff's expression had changed. His attention focused on the radio. They found something in the North Passage, some kind of disturbance in the barriers. The wooden doll suddenly scampered to the memory well, diving into it and vanishing. Moments later, it re-emerged, clutching something in its wooden hands. A small stone shaped like a perfect teardrop, glowing with soft inner light. A boundary stone, Weber gasped. I've only read about them. The entities use them to maintain the separation between physical tunnels and their spiritual domain. The doll offered the stone to Joseph, who took it cautiously. Through the kaleidoscope, he could see energy flowing within the stone, pulsing in rhythm with the light of the sentinel blade. Together they form a key, Elena realized, studying Maya's journal. Maya wrote about this. The blade cuts the bonds, but the stone guides the spirits back to their proper place. The sheriff's radio crackled again. They're coming from both passages now, he warned. We need to move. Joseph questioned. Blade still pointed at Weber. Blackwood removed his badge, tossing it onto the cavern floor where it landed, with a metallic clatter. I've enforced the covenant for 15 years, watched children taken, families destroyed. His weathered face showed years of suppressed guilt. I can't do it anymore. Elena studied Maya's map, tracing the red path with her finger. This leads to a vertical shaft that connects directly to the gateway chamber, bypassing the main tunnels. Weber pointed to a narrow fissure in the cavern wall, barely visible in the gloom. That must be it. The entities reconfigure the tunnels, but certain fixed points remain constant, anchors in the physical world. The voices on the radio grew more urgent. Joseph made his decision, lowering the blade from Weber's direction but keeping it ready. You'll help us perform the ritual, then you'll answer for what you've done. Weber nodded, relief washing over his features. The ritual requires 3 elements: the blade to sever the entity's control, the stone to guide the children home, and blood from those responsible for the taking, freely given at the gateway. My blood too, Blackwood added grimly. I've facilitated 7 takings during my time as sheriff. They squeezed through the narrow fissure, Blackwood leading the way with his flashlight, Elena following with Maya's journal open to the map page, Joseph behind her with the blade and stone, and Weber bringing up the rear. The passage was tight, in places requiring them to turn sideways to proceed. The council will realize what we're attempting, Blackwood warned as they moved. They'll try to stop us. Breaking the covenant threatens everything they've built. The town's prosperity is built on stolen children, Elena said bitterly. It deserves to fall. The fissure widened slightly, allowing them to move faster. According to Maya's map, they were traversing a boundary zone between the physical tunnels and what she had labeled the in-between, a realm where the entities held the children's consciousness. As they progressed, the stone walls gradually gave way to a crystalline substance that reflected their lights in prismatic patterns. Through the kaleidoscope, Joseph could see faint shapes moving within the crystal, children's spirits observing their passage. We're in the veil now, Wera explained, his voice hushed with academic awe despite their situation. The barrier between worlds is thinnest here. The passage suddenly opened into a small chamber, where crystal formations had grown into a natural archway. Suspended within the arch hung an ancient bronze bell, green with verdigris, its surface covered with symbols similar to those on the sentinel blade. The calling bell, Blackwood whispered, used in the original ceremony to summon the entities. I've never seen it before, only read about it in the covenant texts. The wooden doll scammered to the bell, pointing urgently through the kaleidoscope. Joseph saw Maya's spirit hovering nearby, her expression intent. She wants us to ring it, Elena interpreted, studying her daughter's spiritual presence. Weber shook his head vehemently. The bell summons the Watchers, the oldest, most transformed children. It would alert them to our exact location. Or it could do something else entirely, Joseph countered, noting Maya's insistent gestures through the kaleidoscope. The Council's interpretation of these artifacts has been wrong before. The decision was made for them as sounds of pursuit echoed down the passage they'd traveled. Council members were following their trail, closing fast. Joseph reached for the bell, the boundary stone in his other hand. As his fingers touched the ancient bronze, the stone in his palm flared with brilliant light, illuminating symbols on the bell that had been invisible before. Apache words etched into the metal. A warning bell, Joseph translated, his ancestral knowledge responding to the glyphs. Not to summon, but to clear the way, to part the veil for those who would pass between worlds. Without hesitation, he struck the bell with the stone. A clear, pure tone rang out, impossibly loud yet somehow not painful to their ears. The crystalline walls around them vibrated in resonance, the passage ahead shimmering as if reality itself was being reconfigured. The wooden doll danced excitedly, pointing to the now transformed tunnel before them, a direct path to the gateway, open and unguarded. Maya knew, Elena whispered, clutching the journal. She left us everything we would need. As they hurried through the newly revealed passage, Joseph glanced back to see the crystal walls sealing behind them, cutting off their pursuers. The bell continued to ring on its own, its tone changing to a warning that reverberated through the tunnel system. They had found their path to the gateway. Now they needed to complete the ritual before the entities, and the town council could stop them. The passage opened into a vast chamber that Joseph recognized, the circular platform, where he'd first discovered the vertical shaft leading deeper into the tunnel system. They had returned to the gateway, approaching it from below rather than above. The wooden doll scurried ahead, stopping at the center of the platform, where a circular indentation marked the floor. The ritual must be performed here, Weber explained, his academic demeanor returning despite their circumstances. This is where the physical and spiritual realms intersect most directly. Elena consulted Maya's journal. There are drawings of this place, but from a different perspective. She drew it, looking up from below, not down from above, like Joseph first saw it. The doll gestured urgently at the floor indentation. Joseph knelt to examine it, finding that the boundary stone fit perfectly into the depression. When he placed it there, lines of soft light spread outward along previously invisible channels carved into the stone floor, forming an intricate pattern of concentric circles and spiraling symbols. The activation key, Weber breathed. I theorized its existence, but never found evidence until now. Sheriff Blackwood kept watch on the tunnels, his expression tense. How long will this ritual take? The council knows these passages better than any of us. They'll find another way here. Joseph unfolded the copper page from the archive, studying the ritual instructions, while Elena held the kaleidoscope to her eye, scanning the chamber for spiritual presences. There are dozens of them watching, she whispered. Children from every era. Maya is here too, closer than the others. Through the kaleidoscope, Joseph saw them, translucent forms gathered around the platform, their expressions a mixture of hope and fear. Maya stood at the front, her spiritual form clearer and more defined than when they'd seen her before. As Joseph prepared to begin the ritual, a subtle vibration passed through the chamber. The boundary stone pulsed once, then projected a beam of light upward through the vertical shaft, illuminating something that had been hidden in the darkness above. A large obsidian mirror suspended from the ceiling of the upper chamber, angled to reflect downward. The void mirror, Weber gasped. I never knew it was here. The texts only mentioned it in passing. The mirror's surface was not reflective in the normal sense. Instead of showing their images, it displayed a swirling darkness that occasionally parted to reveal glimpses of other places. The town of White Clay seen from above, the creek where Maya's body had been found, council chamber in the town hall. It allows the entities to observe the physical world, Blackwood explained, to select their vessels and monitor the covenant. Joseph raised the sentinel blade toward the mirror. Then it's how they maintain control. The copper page mentions a window between worlds that must be addressed during the ritual. Elena studied Maya's journal more carefully. There's something here about the mirror. Maya wrote that it doesn't just let them look out, it's how they reach out, how they influence dreams and pull children toward the tunnels. The wooden doll suddenly became agitated, pointing frantically toward one of the tunnel entrances. Moments later, they heard footsteps approaching. The council had found another route to the gateway. "We need to begin now," Joseph urged. He positioned himself at the center of the platform, beside the glowing boundary stone. "Weber, Blackwood, the ritual requires your blood, freely given as acknowledgement of your role in the taking." The two men approached, rolling up their sleeves. Weber's hand trembled slightly as he extended his arm. "The blood must touch both the stone and the blade. It creates the necessary connection to reverse the entity's hold." Joseph carefully drew the sentinel blade across Weber's palm, then Blackwood's, allowing their blood to drip onto the boundary stone. The stone absorbed the crimson droplets, its glow intensifying and changing from blue to deep red. "Now what?" Elena asked, keeping her eyes on the approaching footsteps. "My blood too," Joseph said, surprising them all. "Maya's journal mentions this, doesn't it? The parent sacrifice." Elena checked the relevant page, nodding reluctantly. "A parent's blood freely given out of love, not obligation." She looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "It should be both of us. She's our daughter." Together they each drew the blade across their palms, their blood mingling with Weber's and Blackwood's on the stone. As their combined blood was absorbed, the boundary stone pulsed rhythmically, sending waves of red light through the carved channels in the floor. Joseph raised the sentinel blade toward the void mirror, reciting the Apache words inscribed on the copper page: "By blood and bond, by love and loss, we break the chains that hold these spirits. Return what was taken, restore what was broken." The blade began to vibrate in his hand, its glow matching the pulsing rhythm of the boundary stone. Through the kaleidoscope, Elena could see the children's spirits drawing closer, their forms becoming more defined as the ritual progressed. The white-haired councilwoman appeared at one of the tunnel entrances, flanked by other council members. "Stop this immediately," she commanded. "You have no idea what you're unleashing." But it was too late. The boundary stone shot a beam of crimson light directly into the void mirror, causing its surface to ripple like disturbed water. Cracks appeared in the obsidian, spreading outward from the center where the light struck. "It's working," Weber whispered, his academic detachment giving way to wonder. "The severance is beginning." Through the kaleidoscope they watched as tendrils of darkness extending from the mirror, connections to each child's spirit, began to dissolve one by one. The children's translucent forms grew brighter, more substantial. The council members rushed forward but stopped abruptly at the edge of the platform, unable to cross the glowing circles inscribed in the stone. "You're destroying everything," the councilwoman shouted. "The Covenant has protected this town for generations, at the cost of innocent lives," Elena countered, her voice steady despite her fear. "No prosperity is worth that price." The void mirror's cracks widened, darkness spilling from within like liquid shadow. The children's spirits began to rise toward the fractured surface, drawn by the ritual's power. Maya's spirit approached Joseph and Elena, her form now almost solid enough to see without the kaleidoscope. Her lips moved, forming words they could finally hear clearly. "It's not enough. The Watchers are fighting back. They need to see themselves to be freed." Joseph stared at the cracking void mirror, Maya's words echoing in his mind. "They need to see themselves to be freed." He glanced at the kaleidoscope in Elena's hands, understanding dawning. "The Watchers, the oldest children, they've forgotten what they were," he said. "They need to remember they were human once." Elena nodded, raising the kaleidoscope toward the mirror. "But how do we make them see?" The wooden doll suddenly scampered to Joseph's pack, rummaging frantically until it pulled out the camera he had brought to document the tunnels. It thrust the device toward Joseph, with urgent, jerky movements. "Of course," Weber breathed. "The kaleidoscope lets us see their true form, but they need to see themselves as they once were." Joseph took the camera, understanding instantly. Through the kaleidoscope, the children's spirits were visible, but a photograph might capture their image in a way the entities themselves could perceive. As the council members watched helplessly from beyond the platform's edge, Joseph raised the camera toward the mass of shadows, now swirling around the cracking mirror. He clicked the shutter repeatedly, the flash illuminating the chamber in bursts of brilliant light. The sentinel blade in his hand vibrated more intensely with each flash, as if responding to the camera's function. Through the kaleidoscope, Elena could see the shadow forms recoiling from the light, their elongated shapes momentarily resolving into more recognizable human outlines. "It's working," she whispered. "The flash is forcing them to take form." The camera's digital display showed what the naked eye couldn't see, translucent figures of children surrounding the platform, and above them, darker, more distorted forms that seemed to be slowly changing shape with each photograph. Joseph handed the camera to Elena and raised the sentinel blade higher, directing its energy toward the void mirror while reciting more words from the copper page. "Remember who you were. Remember your true form. The darkness is not your nature, but your prison." The wooden doll clambered onto the boundary stone, its blank face turned upward toward the mirror. Through the kaleidoscope, Maya's spirit stood in the same position, her hands raised in mimicry of Joseph's stance. "Something's happening," Blackwood warned, pointing to the cracks in the obsidian surface. Light began to pour through the fractures in the mirror, not the red glow of the ritual, but a pure white radiance that seemed to cut through the shadow forms like a blade. The entities writhed in the beam, their shapes continuing to transform, becoming less elongated, more childlike. Weber stepped forward, his academic reserve completely abandoned now, tears streaming down his face. "Emily," he called out, recognizing one of the changing forms. "Emily, is that you?" A small girl's figure separated from the mass of shadows, her form gradually solidifying as she descended toward the platform. She appeared to be about 6 years old, dressed in clothing from the 1930s, her expression a mixture of confusion and recognition. "Eli," the spirit child whispered, her voice faint but distinct. "You got so old." More shadow forms began to separate and transform, dozens of children from different eras emerging from the darkness that had engulfed them for so long. Through the kaleidoscope, Elena could see them clearly now, not just translucent spirits, but becoming more solid with each passing moment. The council members watched in stunned silence, their opposition forgotten, in the face of this unprecedented manifestation. The white-haired councilwoman sank to her knees, whispering. All this time, they were still children. Maya's spirit approached her parents, her form more substantial than any of the others. The wooden doll danced at her feet, moving in perfect synchronization with her steps. "The oldest ones are remembering now," she said, her voice stronger than before. "But they're afraid. They've been in the darkness so long." Joseph realized what needed to be done. He handed the sentinel blade to Elena and picked up the camera again. "Take photos of every child you can see," he instructed Weber and Blackwood. "We need to capture all of them, create a record of who they were." As the three men moved around the platform, photographing the emerging spirits, Elena stood at the center, with the blade held high, maintaining the connection to the fracturing mirror. The boundary stone pulsed beneath her feet, sending waves of energy through the chamber. From her pack, Elena withdrew the final item they had brought, a small digital tablet. She turned it on, quickly transferring the photos from the camera's memory card. As images of the children appeared on the screen, captured somehow by the camera's interaction with the kaleidoscope's properties, she held it up toward the void mirror. "Look," she called to the remaining shadow forms, still clinging to the mirror's surface. "This is who you were. This is who you can be again." The tablet's screen projected the images larger than should have been possible, casting photographs of the children against the chamber walls. Each image showed not the distorted shadows, but the children as they had been in life. Innocent, human, free. A low, keening sound filled the chamber, not threatening but mournful, a collective cry of recognition and grief from entities that had forgotten their own humanity centuries ago. The fractures in the void mirror widened suddenly, shards of obsidian falling to the platform below. As the mirror broke apart, a final surge of light poured through, illuminating the chamber with blinding intensity. When Joseph could see again, the shadow forms were gone. In their place stood dozens of children, solid enough to be visible without the kaleidoscope, though still translucent like figures caught between worlds. Maya stood at the center of them all, more present than she had been since her death 7 years ago. The wooden doll lay motionless at her feet, its purpose apparently fulfilled. It worked, Weber breathed, staring at his sister's spirit in wonder. The reversal ritual worked, but Maya's expression remained troubled. Only partly, she said, her voice echoing strangely. We're free from the mirror, free from their control. But we still can't leave the tunnels. We're still trapped between worlds. Joseph looked at the copper page, searching for answers. There must be more to the ritual. Something we've missed. There is, Maya said, stepping closer to her parents. The final step. The hardest one of all. The boundary stone pulsed once more, projecting words onto the chamber wall in glowing script. The conclusion of the ritual, written in Apache symbols that Joseph could somehow read. What was divided must be rejoined. What was separated must be made whole. The vessels await their spirit's return. Dawn broke over Joseph's property, pale light filtering through the cellar entrance where they had emerged from the tunnels hours before. The children's spirits had followed them, visible now without the kaleidoscope. Dozens of translucent forms from across the centuries, unable to venture beyond the boundaries of Joseph's land. In his hands, Joseph held a small clay figurine that Maya's spirit had guided him to find in the deepest chamber before they ascended. Crude but recognizable as a human form, it matched descriptions in the copper page, a vessel created during the original covenant, designed to house a returning spirit. There's one for each child taken, Weber explained, examining the figurine with reverence. But they've been hidden, scattered throughout Whiteclay over generations. The council members had remained below, their authority shattered by the truth they'd witnessed. Only Sheriff Blackwood had followed Joseph's group to the surface, his weathered face solemn as he watched the children's spirits gather in Joseph's yard. The vessels await their spirit's return. Elena repeated the final words of the ritual, cradling Maya's journal. We need to find all these figurines, one for each child. That would take months, Blackwood said. They could be anywhere in town, buried in foundations, hidden in walls, stored in attics. Maya's spirit approached, more defined in the morning light than the others. The wooden doll that had guided them lay in the grass at her feet, completely lifeless now. There's another way, she said, her voice carrying on the breeze. A substitution. Joseph looked at the single clay figurine in his hand. What do you mean? New vessels, Maya explained, made by someone with Apache blood, with love and purpose. She gestured toward Joseph's abandoned workshop. You have the skill, Dad. You could craft new vessels for us. Joseph's heart clenched. He hadn't created anything since Maya's death. His hands had forgotten the joy of shaping wood and clay, of bringing form from formlessness. Elena touched his arm gently. This is why you were called to find the tunnels, Joseph. Not just to discover the truth, but to finish what was started centuries ago. Weber nodded eagerly. The original vessels were created as substitutes for physical bodies. New ones could serve the same purpose, allowing the spirits to manifest in the physical world again. Joseph looked at his workshop, the dust-covered tools, the abandoned projects. I don't know if I can. You made this, Maya said, touching the wooden doll with her translucent foot. It carried part of my spirit, guided you through the tunnel. You've already begun the work without knowing it. Understanding dawned on Joseph's face. The doll he'd been carving for Maya's birthday, abandoned after her death, it had somehow connected to her spirit, become a vessel for a fragment of her consciousness. I'll need help, he said finally. There are too many children. The town will help, Blackwood declared. They need to make amends for generations of complicity. He surveyed the gathered spirits. Each family that benefited from the covenant should participate in breaking it. As the morning progressed, word spread through White Clay. Residents arrived at Joseph's property, first in ones and twos, then in groups, families carrying tools and materials, looking both frightened and determined as they witnessed the spirits of children their town had sacrificed over generations. Joseph reopened his workshop, the familiar sense of wood and clay bringing back memories of happier times. He began with Maya, carving a perfect likeness from cedar, his hands remembering their skill as if they had never stopped creating. Elena worked beside him, painting symbols from the copper page onto each vessel, while Weber recited the words of the reversal ritual over and over, his sister's spirit watching with patient hope. By sunset, dozens of vessels lined Joseph's porch. Wooden figures, clay sculptures, even modern materials shaped by the hands of White Clay's residents under Joseph's guidance. Each was crafted with care, with acknowledgement of the town's dark history, with desire for redemption. As twilight deepened, Joseph placed the completed vessels in a circle on the ground where his property met the boundary of the tunnels below. The children's spirits gathered around, their translucent forms glowing softly in the gathering darkness. "What happens now?" Elena asked, standing beside Joseph at the circle's edge. "We complete the ritual," he replied, unfolding the copper page one last time. "We call them home." Joseph raised the sentinel blade, its edge catching the last light of day. Elena held the boundary stone beside him. Together they recited the final words of the ritual. "By our hands these vessels are offered. By our hearts these spirits are welcomed. What was divided, we make whole again." Joseph passed the blade across his palm one more time, letting the blood drip onto the boundary stone. The stone flared to life, its glow spreading to each vessel in the circle. The children's spirits moved forward hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. Maya led the way, approaching the cedar figure Joseph had carved in her likeness. She reached out, her translucent fingers touching the wooden surface. A gentle wind arose, circling the gathered vessels and spirits. Through the kaleidoscope, which Elena held to her eye one last time, she could see threads of light connecting each spirit to its designated vessel, like silver cords pulling them gently into their new homes. Maya's spirit turned to her parents, her form already beginning to merge with the cedar figure. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice both farewell and greeting, "for finding the truth. For bringing us home." One by one, the spirits disappeared, drawn into their vessels. As the last one vanished, the boundary stone pulsed once more, then went dark. The sentinel blade in Joseph's hand crumbled to dust, its purpose fulfilled. For a moment, nothing happened. The circle of vessels remained motionless in the deepening twilight. Then slowly the cedar figure of Maya stirred. Its wooden limbs moved with hesitant grace, its carved face somehow softening, becoming more lifelike though still clearly wood. All around the circle, the other vessels began to animate, not as humans reborn, but as something new. Living art, spirits housed in forms crafted with love, able to move, to communicate, to exist in the physical world once more. Maya's wooden form rose to its feet, taking tentative steps toward Joseph and Elena. When she spoke, her voice came not from carved lips, but from the essence within, the spirit that had finally found its way home. "We can stay now," she said simply. "We can be a family again." Joseph knelt before the cedar figure that housed his daughter's spirit, tears flowing freely down his face. "Yes," he whispered, "we can be whole again." Above them, stars appeared in the darkening sky, reflecting in the windows of Joseph's house, no longer a place of sorrow and isolation, but a home reborn, just as the spirits had been. The truth had been buried beneath them all along, waiting to be discovered, waiting to set them free.